What's up, it's Playstan, and first off, I should have made this video a while ago when the Windfall Games event was actually recent, but I got distracted. I was trying to get a lot of unboxing videos recorded and uploaded. So I'm going to end up combining the Windfall Games recap and the Finch and Sparrow Birdcage event recaps all into this video. As I probably ended up mentioning in the title, I finally won a cEDH event. This was the Windfall. This one was at Windfall Games in Tehachapi, California. I believe there was a total of 28 people, so not huge, but still pretty decent turnout. The prize support was pretty good with Ancient Tomb, Demonic Tutor, Wheel of Fortune, and a Grim Monolith as prize options. And there were a few pretty interesting decks that we saw at this event, so let's just start the recap. As usual, I was playing cEDH. The deck is noticeably a bit weaker after the bans, since Dockside had the ability to just win games on the spot, but it's definitely still playable and still strong, maybe not quite as powerful as it was before, but it's definitely still a pretty good option. Round 1 was against, I want to say, Tymna Thrasios, Tymna Malcolm, and Rocco. This game I had a pretty strong start with a few Mana Dorks and a Ragavan, and I was mostly able to just fly under the radar and build a board. And I eventually played out an Enduring Vitality, which I think is a great new piece for cEDH, especially with Kinnan, which I ended up drawing pretty soon after. And with both of those out, I had pretty much all the cEDH activations I could ever want, made infinite mana, and just, took the game from there. There were a couple attempts at board wipes. Thankfully, those got stopped. Someone had an Oppo agent out, but someone else took care of it. If they didn't take care of it, I still would have gone for it on my turn, because I also had removal that I didn't end up needing to use. But yeah, just a pretty good game. I got to keep the board around, which really helped, and I took it from there. Round 2 was against Tyam, Blue Farm, and Elevere. I was a little scared of Tyam since I know that it has some complicated combo lines, which makes it a little difficult to interact with. I'm not really sure when I need to interact and with what. There ended up being a couple stacks pieces like Cursed Totem out, but ended up playing a Philia so I could take care of them on my turn. Sometimes I wanted to keep the Cursed Totem out just so the Tyam player couldn't use their creature activations, but other turns I did temporarily get rid of it with Philia just so I could, advance my board state a little bit. Later into the game, I was in the position to combo. I did almost mess it up because I was thinking that with Derevi Emil, just infinite mana, it's a bit of a more reliable, or I guess win con, than just the Planeswalker line. So I ended up grabbing the Derevi, but I didn't have another red source. So I thought I had just thrown the game, but thankfully I was able to get some creatures to hit through combat, which gave me the untapped triggers, giving me the red source. So, I still got there, thankfully. Almost messed it up, but we still got there. Like I said, the Tyam was a little scary, but the stacks pieces kind of held them back, and Elevere is a deck that you don't see much, and it plays a decent amount of stacks, but the main stacks piece that ended up playing out was a Collector Oof, which wasn't a huge deal for me, because most of my creatures were, since most of my mana was coming from creatures and not artifacts. So yeah, another win there, pretty good, in 2 wins for the Swiss rounds. That's very good, very solid. Round 3 was against Ratatabric, which is another very interesting choice. I had heard that there was a person who played that at the store. 6, it's the same 6 deck and player that I've mentioned in previous videos. Oh, I forgot. I was gonna try and go through the actual rounds. Oops. Oh, but I guess it tells you that I drew. Whatever, anyway. Round 3 was against the Ratatabric, 6, and Kinnan. I had a pretty decent hand, but I mulled down and only kept 1 land, because it had a Mystic Remora, but because that just felt like the only thing I could pitch. and but I just did not end up drawing anything for a while. A couple different people tried to go for win attempts, and when it didn't work out, the game was slowed way down, so we decided to go for a draw. We did end up playing the rest of the game out, and I did have the potential to win, but I kind of messed it up a little, so I didn't mind the tie, because yeah, if we just played it out and I messed up the win attempt, you know, I'd be a little upset. But yeah, I think going for the draw was fair there. At the time that we were deciding, I drew into a few cards and was able to start coming back, but I'm like, you know, I'll just take the guaranteed point, and it ended up working out, so that's good. Round 4. See, let's switch it now. Round 4 was against Winota, a deck that has kind of disappeared over the last couple years, kind of fallen out of favor. But Yuriko and Kinnan. My hand was okay, but since particularly the Kinnan player, but also like Yuriko, they wanted to get a draw because it's more beneficial for them points-wise. I was kind of undecided on it because I kind of wanted the third win to guarantee a spot in the top 2. But yeah, they kind of decided to just kind of focus me a bit to convince me to go for a draw, which kind of sucks because I wasn't really able to play the game at that point, but it makes sense to get the point, for them to try and get the points there. And, you know, eventually I was like, okay, if I don't draw anything that's going to turn it around, I'll take the draw. So that's what I ended up doing. So yeah, at that point I took that second draw, which left me with 2 wins and 2 draws. That's 12 points at the end of Swiss. This was another cut to top 10, which is why I was kind of trying to make sure I had a spot in the top 2 during round 4, but luckily 12 points was enough to get me second after the Swiss, so that means I had secured the spot in the final pod. After the semifinals, the final pod ended up being the same Ratatabric, the same 6, and a Tymna Thrasios player. I had a pretty strong opening hand, and I was able to get a Smothering Tithe out pretty early. The Ratatabric player did go for a win on one of their turns, and it forced the pod to use all their interaction. So I think I was on turn 4 was when I was able to go for my win attempt. I had a Dork or 2, and then a few treasures from Smothering Tithe, and I was able to win off that. I had some Sisei loyalty from Lavinia, and just the mana to actually go for activations. And yeah, I was able to win off that. The interaction had kind of already been used at that point. And it wasn't the most high intensity game, I guess, but it's, you know, still a fairly clean win with Sisei, and I was pretty happy about it. I ended up choosing the Grim Monolith as my prize. I don't have one. Well, I didn't have one at that point. And yeah, really happy to get a win in a cEDH event finally, and you know, thank you to Windfall Games for hosting the event. It was a lot of fun. I'll probably end up going back at some point. And now for the second tournament, slightly less happy. My performance at Finch and Sparrow's Birdcage event. Finch and Sparrow Games in Long Beach, with a whopping 65 people, so I was definitely looking forward to it, and, you know, kind of testing myself. Again, I was on Sisei without too many changes from the Windfall Games version. Let me actually pull it up. There we go. Birdcage, a cEDH tournament. I can't see the deck list, so I'm gonna do my best to remember people's commanders. Again, this happens in a lot of these. Sorry if I mess yours up. I'll do my best. Round 1 was against, I'm pretty sure, Tymna Thras TNT, Blue Farm, and I'm not 100% sure. I think it was Master of Keys. Turn 1 I played land and passed, and then somebody played an Esper Sentinel. And then the next person in priority passed, and then it was me, and I tried a Vamp Tutor, and it got Mental Misstepped, and it's like, oh, well, why didn't you use it on the Esper Sentinel? He's like, oh, I was going to, and then you showed the Vamp Tutor. So just really unlucky with the turn order there. Oh well, kind of sucked, because I was going for an early Smothering Tithe in that game, which I could have gotten if the Vamp Tutor resolved, but, you know, oh well. Blue Farm became threatening with Rev and other and Tymna, I believe, as well, so we removed some of their stuff, and once their stuff was removed and they were no longer the threat, I kind of ended up being the new threat. So Sisay got removed. I did eventually play the Smothering Tithe, but I think I could have just tried playing it as soon as possible rather than waiting, and it would have been a little better, would have accumulated a little more treasure, a little more mana, but oh well. That's what I thought was the correct play, but maybe not in hindsight. Blue Farm, before their turn, got an end step ad nauseum off, and as soon as they went to upkeep, I did try and convince who I think was playing Master of Keys to sack their Ranger Captain. They ended up waiting, so I tried using Silence as well, and then once they had done some stuff just at their upkeep in response to my Silence, they used Ranger Captain, or they forced him to use it by bouncing it. So they ended up playing Born Upon a Wind, and they had the Underworld Breach, Brain Freeze line just on board with all during their upkeep, so there wasn't much we could do. I did have a Bowmasters that got them down to 2 life, but sadly it wasn't quite enough. Here it is, pod 12. Let's go to round 2. Round 2, where is my pod? There it is. Round 2 was against another Sisay player, Blue Farm, and I'm pretty sure it was Malcolm Tana, teamer. My starting hand was okay, but it really needed to draw a second land other than the Gaia's Cradle I had, so I ended up being pretty behind. I had a Strict Serenade I used on the Sisay's turn 2 Selvala. It's not a win attempt or anything, but I know, as a Sisay player, I know that it goes kind of crazy with Selvala. So it just felt like the right move. The teamer player presented a win with Glinthorn, but luckily we were able to stop it before that kind of started happening. But the Blue Farm player had been drawing a bunch of cards, and I was still very behind, so I couldn't really do much. They presented Thoracle Console, and we really didn't have any interaction at that point. Yeah, if I still had the Strix, I could have tried countering the Thassa's, but again, even if it wasn't super threatening at the time, I still think countering Selvala is the right move against Sisay, especially because I was thinking on my next turn of searching for Agatha's Soul Cauldron to give some of my creatures the Selvala ability, which would have been great, but didn't quite work out. Yeah, that was round 2. I think I made most of the correct plays, but maybe I could have mulled a little better because the hand was really just ended up being behind. Round 3, let's try and find my pod. There it is. My round, so I was 0-2 going into round 3, so I was starting to get a little discouraged, especially because the previous event I played in, I had won, so being 0-2 at that point, coming off that high, didn't feel great. So I was a little discouraged, but I knew I needed to try and get a win here. It was against another Blue Farm, Perforos, which was unique and therefore a little scary, and another Sisay player. I had an okay start with a dork or two, and then I eventually played an early Sisay, and then Perforos stormed a little bit with on their turn with a Blank Goblin and Jessica's Will. I showed them a Mind Break for their Perforos since it was their 3rd spell, and I thought the Perforos damage was to any target, so it would like completely wipe my board of mana dorks and stuff like that. But they explained, no, it's just opponents, and I was convinced to hold on to the Mind Break. And they, on the same turn, tried a Chandra's Incinerator, which is any target, so I ended up using the Mind Break on that. The Perforos player was getting at least 2 damage every turn because they had Norin the Wary, and it was really starting to hurt life totals, but thankfully I was safe for a cycle with the One Ring. Cast Trigger. Blue Farm used a Pact to Negation on something, I don't remember quite what, but then when it came to their turn, they couldn't pay for it because they had a Kinnan, or a Mockingbird copying Kinnan and a Mox Amber. So when that Kinnan Mockingbird got removed, the Mox Amber was turned off, so they weren't able to pay for their pact anymore. So they were just kind of out of the game at that point, unfortunately. The other Sisay player was starting to get scary, and so when it came to my turn, my turn before the turn they would try and go off, usually what you would do is try and save some cards, some interaction for them. but I had a win attempt in hand, so I ended up trying for that. I cast Cultist of the Absolute from my hand, used cEDH to search out Dahada, and then go through the Planeswalker line from there, or search out Dahada, then search out Chromatic Orrery, and then go for the Planeswalker line from there. It was a scary game because the other cEDH player was threatening a win, and the Purphoros was really threatening life totals. But thankfully I was able to get it. A lot of cEDH decks are kind of falling back on that Cultist of the Absolute Dahada Chromatic Orrery line because with the loss of Dockside. So and it has definitely shown up and been impactful in my games, as you can see from this. So yeah, I was really glad to finally get a win in this event. And then let's move on to round 4. Round 4. Let's go to the actual round 4, which I did not win. Spoiler alert. Round 4 is when it all went to shit, sadly. It was against 2 TNT players, Tymna Thrasios and a Magda player. I was able to get a turn 2 Smothering Tithe, which slowed down one of the TNT players because they had some like Aristic and stuff to play. But then once the Smothering Tithe was already out, they decided to hold back on that. And then just a really early Smothering Tithe like that will just win the game for cEDH decks if it sticks around, which it did. So I ended up being really ahead that game, but then the turn before I was going to go off, I was holding up interaction as well. The Magda presented an activation, and so there was Magda, another person, then me in terms of turn/priority order. And the whole time Magda's presenting their activation and stuff like that, the guy in front of me is acting like he has something. So I'm like, okay, I won't use, I had an Urtai in hand that I could cast if one of the Thrasios players drew a card. So I had interaction, but then I'm like, okay, well, if this guy's acting like he has something, I'll just hold on to it because, it's better to make your opponents do it. But, so I let the Magda activation resolve, which I really, really shouldn't have done. And then it turns out the TNT player between us in priority only had a Fierce Guardianship, which doesn't help. And then at that point, since the activation had resolved, it was a little late because, yeah, I could cast the Urtai from hand and try and disrupt the combo. But they had another Clock of Omens activation in response that just let them go off. There's a chance I could have responded when Magda triggered with the Urtai and then disrupted it, but either way, I felt so dumb for as soon as the activation resolved and the guy didn't end up having anything, I could just feel the embarrassment and the sadness welling up because I'm I just threw this game. It was so winnable for me. So winnable. I had it in the bag. I had all the interaction I needed, and I just threw it all away. So yeah, the Magda player got it, and I was not happy with myself. Yeah. So going into round 5, it was against another TNT player, Thrasios Yoshimaru and Tivit. And going into the round, I was still very discouraged from the previous round, so I made a couple of maybe not so great plays because my mind was just a little scattered at that point. I had a pretty decent start, had some nice value creatures out, but then Tivit wiped the board, so the game was slowed down quite a bit. Tivit went for a couple win attempts and got out most of our interaction, but we still couldn't really do much because he ended up playing a Curse Totem, and cEDH and the 2 Thrasios decks obviously need creature activations to really do anything. And couldn't really do anything about it because as soon as I were to remove it, the Thrasios Yoshimaru player, who was very ahead at that point, would just try and go off as soon as it was gone. So we just kind of kept it around. But like I said, the game had been slowed down quite a bit, so time began to become an issue. And eventually, on the last turn of the game, I tried going for the win because it's the last turn, might as well. At that point, I couldn't take a tie because we all needed the win to try and get into the top 16. So yeah, I tried going for the win, but since it involved getting rid of the curse totem, the Thrasimaru player went off on that same turn and ended up taking it. So yeah, that was kind of the end of that. Oh, did I even go to the thing? No, I didn't. Yeah, here's round 5. Yeah, that was kind of the end of my tournament run in the Birdcage tournament. Overall, it was a really cool event, especially with how many people ended up being there. But the big misplay, it made me just really upset and disappointed with myself. I really don't get upset when it comes to like losing in these sorts of events, because sometimes that's just how it goes. Sometimes you don't draw much, or other people just draw better. That's how it is. But when I'm the one who's just making a mistake, that's when I get like a little upset and disappointed. Especially because if the game was looking really good for me, and if I ended up taking it, which I probably would have, that would put me at 2 wins or 10 points, and that would have been enough to get into top 16. But sadly, that didn't happen. And either way, at this point, there's nothing I can do. Just try and learn from it and improve, do better in future events. But yeah, this has been Playstand, and this was another cEDH recap video. Sorry, again, the Windfall one is a little late at this point, so I'm kind of mashing them into this one. Let me know what you think, and I will see you later.